Welcome to Eye on History. You know, World War II will always be a memory of my generation, and today we want to discuss a chapter of those years with a gentleman who served in the Air Force and was a prisoner of war for 20 months at the hands of the Germans. Not only 20 months, but through three very, very brutal winters in Germany. And it's a pleasure to welcome Joe Hemm to the show. Joe, thanks for taking time to tell us your story. It's a fascinating one. Let's talk a little bit about your background. First of all, you've been in Pickle many, many years. Tell us a little bit about your first years, especially as you joined the military.
The first draft was in late 1940, and there was 31 of us left. Actually, January 1941. That was the whole year before war was declared, December of 41, and we were transported to Camp Shelby in Mississippi. And then in the meantime, the war in December of 1941, we were in Camp Shelby getting ready to move to New York, and they were going to put us on the Normandy, and that sank. And so then we went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, and while we were there, four of us luckily got out of the field artillery, and we got in the Air Force. And we were waiting to be assigned, and they finally found room for us. They sent us to Miami Beach, and we were casual detachment there doing nothing. And from Miami Beach, we finally were assigned to our initial cadet schools. And Dick Collins and Mark Minnick went to a pilot school, and Bob Angevine and I were the other two. And you would go wherever they needed you that day, that week, or whatever it was. And we went to a bombardier school in Midland, Texas. And after we completed the school, we were second lieutenants, and then they sent us to Las Vegas for armament. And we fired every conceivable from a 22 to a 50 caliber, and that was skeet and trap and air to air, air to ground, ground to air. It was the most fun you ever had in your life. And then from there we went to our groups where we were coming together with all the different officers and enlisted men on the aircraft. And we went through phase training as a group, as a group on the aircraft, 10 of us. And we did a lot of practice bombing out of Rapid City, South Dakota, and we would fly out over the Pacific like 500 miles out, so we could have tracers you could see, and that way you knew where your bullets were going. And on one trip coming back, we hit a thunderhead, and that plane just bounced around like just like a little ball, and we were, the altimeter, you could see that thing cranking up and then down. It was updrafts, downdrafts, and we finally made an emergency landing in Miles City, Montana. And we called the base back at Rapid City, and they said, inspect the aircraft. If it's flyable, bring it back. So we went out and looked it over. Of course, we look over more now than we did then. So we said, yeah, it was safe enough, so we flew it back. And when we got there, we found out the vertical fin was off of about 15 degrees, and it needed a lot of repair work. And the phase training continued there, and then we were getting ready to go for our overseas. And we assembled, and then we were to leave Bangor, Maine. And we were a little late getting in there. We had bad weather again. We were forced down Rochester, New York as a crew, and the next day we got into Bangor. And then we took off and we went to Newfoundland, and that was a refueling point. And the following day we took off about 10 at night, and it was in June, and then it really just didn't get dark all night long. And then we got into Prestwick, Scotland, and then took our plane on into Polbrook, which was the air base in England that we flew out of.
Joe, let me pick up the story right there, because I've always been fascinated by the movies and History Channel, and I remember very vividly the briefing that the all of the pilots and all of the crew members, as you went through these briefings, especially as you got towards the flight in which you were shot down. What goes through your mind as you sit there listening to the briefings? How much danger did you sense, or were you so focused on what you were intended to do that you never thought about the possibility that I might not come back here?
Well, it was always the thought that you were going to make it. Somebody else may not, but you were always going to make it. And so really, you kind of look forward to it.
Is that right?
And but the last mission we went on was the longest deep enemy territory. We had no fighter protection. We had escort by the enemy all the way in now, but we had no friendly escort. And the mission was so deep in Germany that we had half of the bomb bay was a gas tank.
Just to give you extra mileage.
Yeah, and so we were all concerned about that because that's just too many more hours up there with them shooting at you.
And the odds sometimes don't favor you. Let's talk a little bit about that flight, Joe. As you're going along, you're looking for your target, and all of a sudden, what happened that you knew that you were going to be shot down? What happened, and what were your feelings as you were getting ready to, again, be put into the hands of the Germans?
Well, you were so busy, other than the area where the flak, the enemy fighters wouldn't come into the flak. But they would take you as far as the flak, and then you just knew you were so busy you didn't have time to think about it much.
And again, did the plane just land like a normal landing, only in an adverse spot, or did you really crash land and were lucky to escape?
Our plane got hit. They had what they called ME-210s would sit back out of range of our guns, and they would calculate the miles per hour, the airspeed, the altitude, and then they would send that message to the ground for the flak. And they also had single engine Focke-Wulf 190, and they would peel right into the target. They'd come right in and. But when we got hit, we had two real bad hits, and one hit in the bomb bay and the other wing, and it was burning ferociously.
And again, you were so busy, you didn't worry about what was going to happen.
No, all we wanted to do was get out of there then.
And did you parachute out?
Yeah.
Or did you
No, oh yeah, the plane crashed. We landed, actually, our chute, a couple of us collapsed right in the North Sea off the coast of Denmark. The North Frisian Islands parallel the coast of Denmark, and the couple guys landed in the North Sea, and of course you have 50, 60 minutes, about all you can make it there. And
of the 10 men who were on the plane, how many of them survived that?
Two got killed in the aircraft, and two they didn't pick up out of the sea, so 6 of us made it.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about you've landed, you're in the North Sea, or you're on land. What happened as obviously the German soldiers you up? What went through your mind as you were there on foreign soil, wondering what the heck is going to happen to me here?
Well, we could see when we landed, there was a fishing boat, and we got this Danish guy to put us on, but we weren't on there very long. They got us off, and then they just marched us across this island. This was like on a sandbar, and they marched us across the island, and on the other side was a German patrol craft base. And they put us on that, that was about 1 o'clock when we got shot down in the afternoon, and about midnight we were on that patrol craft. And then we spent the night in the North Sea heading for Hemm, Germany, which was the mainland. And as daylight broke, they let us go up above. We were down in the hold, and you looked out, and this is what always reminds me of a guy burning up my flag, the most precious thing in all the countries in the world. And you got out from the bottom of that patrol craft and got up, and all you could see was that swastika. And you couldn't see land anywhere. We were out in the North Sea, you know. And
let's talk a little bit, Joe, about they take you on board this craft. At that time, were you comfortable that they weren't going to kill you? Did you have any idea where you were going? What were your thoughts? Here you are in German territory. You're a prisoner of war at this point. What thoughts went through your mind about what's going to happen to me, Joe Hemm?
Well, that naturally, that thought never left. I
Yes.
mean, you just couldn't imagine what was coming next. And of course, the story would, as we moved inland, then they put us on a train in Husum, and we came down through the Ruhr Valley, and that was when they were bombing Essen, Dusseldorf, and Cologne, all their manufacturing area. And it was a moonlight night like last night, and you'd see these shells of buildings there. And we pulled into Hamburg, and civilians saw us there. They let us get off the train, and boy, they put us back on there to protect us.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Joe,
And,
you told me that the first prisoner of war camp you went to was near Berlin. And again, I wasn't aware. Tell me a little bit about that prison camp. How big was it? Was it a prison camp for the officers? And did the officers really have different camps to go to than the enlisted men? How did they distinguish that? And tell us about this first prisoner of war camp. Try to give us a feel for what that was like. I don't think any of us can really tell. We can say, well, we've seen a lot of movies. You were there.
It was Stalag Luft III, and it was southeast of Berlin, just at the Polish border, just north of Czechoslovakia. And we were in the center camp, and there was a north, south, east, and west. And they had English were on one of the camps, I forget which one, and then another camp had enlisted men. And of course, our center camp, and I think it was the south camp, were all officers.
Now tell me about the treatment, Joe, because I've seen enough television, I've seen enough movies. What about the treatment? Were you treated inhumanely? Were you tortured? What was the treatment like? You're in a prisoner of war, you're in Germany, scared to death, obviously. How did they treat you, generally speaking?
Well, before we went to Stalag Luft III, we went through an interrogation camp. And these guys, Lord, they knew where we came from and everything. Their intelligence was so great, and other than we gave them our name, rank, and serial number, and that was it. And of course, they asked for more. And then, but when we got to the camp at Stalag III, the guards, a lot of them had been on the Russian front, all beat up and everything, and they weren't too bad. We used to kid around with them.
That was my question. Were some of the guards humane as far as the treatment was concerned? Let's go back to the first camp. You were there with the officers. What was a day like for the officers in contrast to what might a day like they've been if you were an enlisted man in another camp? What was the difference between the two?
Well, the enlisted men were going on work details, and that would have been welcome just to get out of the monotony of being in that camp. But we had a perimeter, we walked around, and we had schools there, and everybody walked and went to school, you know, just to fill up the time.
Now, when you say school, what type of things took place at the school? What were they trying to indoctrinate you?
No, this would be our own guys as instructors that were knowledgeable.
So you set up your own instructional.
Yeah. This was very. It was all within the camp, and but it was rewarding, and it gave you something to do, and of course you did learn something about it.
Take us through a typical day in your camp. Take us through a typical day, start to finish.
They would be possibly 8 o'clock. Get everybody outside, and that didn't make any difference what the temperature was, and they'd eins, zwei, drei, vier, they'd count, you know.
So there was a lot of accountability.
And, yeah, and they'd get up to about 14, then they'd have to count over again. I forgot where they were, but anyhow, then when they found nobody got away, it was pretty impossible to get out of there, because see, we were so deep, the English Channel hadn't been crossed yet, and our day then, we did all our own cooking. We had Red Cross parcels, and then they would give us a little of that black bread and fish cheese and blood sausage, all that good stuff.
So you were not starved. It wasn't a matter of
no, but
food might not have been good.
Everybody lost weight. I weighed 135 when I come out of there, but we And then when the Allies were getting close, of course, we didn't get a full parcel. They'd possibly 2 or 3 guys have to split one. So you really had to really, count every little piece of food. And
well, you mentioned that it was difficult to escape. As I see the movies and look at the History Channel, it seems as though one of the obligations, at least this is what I pick up, is that you have an obligation to try to escape. Was that part of the regimen when you were in the camp?
Well, when the Allies started to come, it was a different story.
Mm-hmm.
They were on the continent. Before, if you made it to the English Channel, there's no way in the world you're going to get over to England. And of course, to get to Sweden, or Sweden was really the only, Denmark was occupied, and so was Norway. So if you could make it to Sweden, you'd be all right. But it was positively an impossibility. Now, we did have, after the Allies were coming through Belgium and France, we had a few guys that, boy, they practiced this, went through it over and over, that escaped, but they didn't get very far. In fact, when they went to a train station, they tried to buy tickets to Munich. Well, in Germany, that's München.
Oh.
And they knew something was wrong then.
When you didn't
yeah, so the night they marched us out, when the Russians were closing in, these guys were brought back in and marched right with us then.
Now, you talked about the first camp that you went to, and then you were transferred to another camp. I think you mentioned about 500 miles away, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us a little bit about that transition. First of all, why were you transferred to another prisoner of war camp, and how did you get transported from one place to the other? I know you didn't get another plane ride.
Well, this Stalag 3 is where we spent most of the time, and that was close to the Polish border, southeast of Berlin, and the Russians were moving in from the east, and they were so close you could hear the gunfire and everything, and so they marched all of our camps out and just kept taking us farther west, and then when we got down in Czechoslovakia, we got on a train there, and we pulled into the station about midnight, and the sirens went off, and that engineer, boy, he hit the throttle, and that train was out of there. And so we went on down to Munich.
But you were telling me that it took about 14 days to get from one of the other, and you walked about 10 of those days in what was a severe winter. In fact, the 3 winters that you were a prisoner were probably the most severe winters of that decade.
Yeah, that 1945, the Battle of the Bulge, was the coldest in 35 years. And but the worst thing was, like, at night, they'd find one night we slept in a church, but there was no heat in them.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, it was cold. And we got on the train, and then when we got off the train, we went into an abandoned brick factory, and that was warm in there. And they even had running water. You could clean up just a little bit. And
now, that was the prisoner of war camp, the factory, or you still had to move to that?
That was just one that was on our trip. We were on the way. Yeah, we were walking on the way, and so then we went into this last camp, which was Moosburg near Munich, and that's where we were liberated by Patton's tanks.
Before we talk about that, and I want to talk about that, Joe, the story is a tough one. How many prisoners died that you're aware of during this whole ordeal? The conditions were obviously very, very difficult with the cold and disease and everything. Did a lot of the prisoners of war perish?
Well, it's surprising how many didn't. And the German, as you walk through the countryside, the women would bring us hot water out even. And, it was really unbelievable that...
Did the civilian population of Germany, were they friendly to you, or did they realize the war was lost? How do you account for that good treatment?
Well, around any city they were hostile because they'd been hit with bombs, but out in the country they were, I think they really felt sorry for us. And,
but you did have some of the prisoners of war who just simply couldn't...
Oh, yeah, some of them just couldn't make it. I mean, and they just fall beside the road. And of course, Germany was hurting then. They had no... they were just hurting everywhere on food, and
Was there ever a time you had to go for lengthy periods without food?
Yeah, you would, especially on that march, and every once in a while they would have a kind of a supply truck that would, but a funny thing, you weren't that hungry to eat anyhow. I mean,
Is that right?
Yeah, it was
So exhausting?
Yeah, it was cold and everything.
Let's talk a little bit about the second camp, Joe, because the second camp, you were moved from one to the other because the Russians were coming.
Right.
You go to the second camp. How soon after you went to the second camp did you sense, and maybe even the Germans who were in charge of the prisoner of war camp, sense that the war was lost, things were coming to an end? How did you get a feel that freedom was not far away?
Well, we, with all the in the camps and everything, we really had communications, and we had guys that really specialized in that, and we had a pretty good idea what was going on, where it was going on, and in fact, in our regular camp, the Stalag Luft 3 camp, we had PA systems in there that we could hear in German. A lot of the.
So you were more aware of what was going on
Yeah.
than those of us who watched the
Yeah.
movies and the newsreels might have been. All right, now tell me about the day that you were liberated. Tell me, take us through that. I imagine that had to be one of the happiest days of the 22 months.
Well, you could see it coming because there again you could hear the firepower, and then you'd see some of the guards abandoning the camp, and first thing you know, there was nobody there.
So the guards evacuated because they knew things were lost.
They hit for the woods, and then there's a tank pulled in there, and this big Texas opened that dude up and said, "Howdy, fellas."
And then you knew you were free.
Yeah.
What were the first things you did after you realized that you were no longer a prisoner of war?
We went into the record-keeping area where they had all of our records, and we picked up our own cards. I still have it, you know, the one they kept on me with my
identification card.
Yeah, everyone had a POW number, and then they had this little index card, and it had your name, rank, and serial number, and so I think everybody went in and got their own card.
And how long, Joe, then did it take for you to go to a safer haven after that prisoner of war camp? Did that take a while, a couple days, a week? How did that work? I'm interested to know that.
The first thing, the Americans, they got us food, and then transportation was it was just an impossibility. So we found out that we could go into Paris and get money in the bank, so there's a bunch of us went in there, and at one of the banks on the Seine, we got money, and of course we had a little nightlife there for a while. We went back to the camp, and there was still no movement to get us out. It was just such a huge operation.
So you were pretty close to Paris, to the point where you could go in and enjoy your freedom and then go back to the... So you actually went back to the camp after you were liberated.
Yeah, to get out of there, you know. Well, then we made arrangements with our bomb group in England, and finally we got out of there by our bomb group sent a plane over, and we got on a plane, was left the rest of them, and went back to England.
Oh, and, so you were able to fly back?
To our bomb group over in England,
And now what happened to the rest of them? How were they transported? Did they have to wait a while? Did they have to be transported by other means, obviously?
Most of those in Europe ended coming back on Liberty ships, and when we went to England, we actually lucked out where there was Santa Rosa, Santa Paula, and two other luxury ships went between North and South America back in the late 30s and early 40s, and we got on a Santa Rosa, and of course the real injured guys were on top, and we were all down below, which we didn't make any difference to us. But we got home 7 days.
Well, let's talk a little bit, Joe, about the ramifications of the prisoner of war experience with the bad weather. Anything that has lingered on that in your later years, anything that happened to you that you say, hey, this might have happened to me because of the winters in Germany?
Well, I had frostbite, and of course I was laid up a couple years ago. Then in September I had a little flare-up, but really I can't complain about it at all. And,
Then another question, Joe. You went through all of this turmoil at the hands of the Germans. You get out of the war, you go back to the United States, and we hear stories about prisoners of war who were in the Japanese camps having a strong feeling against Japanese or even Japanese Americans. Did you have any of that kind of feeling against anybody who had some German heritage as you left the war scene and as you got to the civilian, your civilian job, and maybe back to Ohio, maybe back to Pickwick? Any feelings about that, or is that just the price of war?
I don't think any of us really got in. Now I could understand the Oriental mind thought, and I could see their situation was a lot different than ours. And but really, I don't think any of us were any worse off. And,
do you still remember? You can. Your story today tells me that you can almost relive the whole experience.
oh yeah, those
you'll
days.
never forget that
you
way.
remember the dates, and so. But every once in a while, I get those reports out and read them. You know, the missions you were on and everything. And,
well, Joe, I'll tell you what, it's been a pleasure to have you talk about your experience as a prisoner of war on our Eye to History program. I want to thank Joe Hemm for sharing his story about those World War II experience. He was a prisoner of war for 20 months and 3 winters. And again, what a fascinating story it's been. Joe Hemm, we want to thank you for joining us. Good. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I'm Dwayne Bachman.
well, I thank you.